Mistakes, they happen all the time in various amounts of ways. Some of them are small and unnoticeable, but sometimes they can happen in such a way that they can cost many people or even just one person a lot of money. It happens all over the world, and the most memorable ones are indeed the ones that are truly expensive. So allow us to show you some of the most expensive mistakes in all of history. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Number 7. King Tut's beard. Without a doubt, the discovery of King Tut and his tomb and everything that was inside of it, one of the biggest and most important finds in archaeological history. But in 2015, a near priceless accident occurred in the Cairo Museum. In short, while working on a display with a golden mask of King Tut, they broke the beard portion of the mask. Obviously, that was not a good thing, and apparently the team almost fled the country because they felt they were going to be brought up on charges. Here's the rub. After studying their mistake and deciding to fully study the beard itself, which they hadn't done before, they realized that they weren't the first people to break it. Apparently, someone broke it and used regular glue to reattach it all the way back in 1946. The team spent 2 months spending time to take the glue off, and they used beeswax to be a more proper adhesive. If you look at the mask now, you won't think it ever got broken off. Number 6. Rena. Who's Rena? Now the question is, what is Rena? Rena was a container ship that, like many before it, was doing its job of carrying lots of cargo before heading to New Zealand via the Bay of Plenty. Everything sounds normal there, right? Except that the ship ran aground, which is the worst thing you can do for a ship like this given all the cargo on board. Not just because a lot of items were sent into the ocean, but a lot of hazardous material was sent into the ocean. Not the least of which is oil, which is grounds for an environmental disaster, obviously. It was a massive mistake that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to fix, and further proof that you can't be lax when you're driving a ship of any size. Number 5. Bridges. You might be thinking, how can a bridge be an expensive mistake? Well, let me ask you a very simple question. What's the worst thing that can happen to a bridge? The answer for this is to collapse with people on it, right? Well, if you look throughout history, you'll find plenty of bridges that were either poorly designed, poorly constructed, or didn't have enough reinforcement to support the weight and walking of people and vehicles. Thus, disasters happen, and various bridges have had to be repaired immediately or rebuilt from the ground up in order to ensure that this doesn't happen again. A great example of this was the Millennium Bridge in London, which was open to the public and then almost immediately shut down when it started to sway as people walked on it. And as they continued to walk on it, they swayed with the bridge and thus made the wobble worse. To prevent collapse, the bridge was shut down, and it took 2 years and $6 million to put dampers on it to ensure that the wobble wouldn't happen again. Number 4. Piper Alpha. We all know that oil refineries are some of the most important yet dangerous workplaces in the world today. We could have easily put the BP disaster in here that let oil out into the oceans around it, but instead, let's go to one that predated that, the Piper Alpha event. This refinery was in the North Sea, and in 1988 it was home to an explosion, a gas fire, and an oil fire. One that cost the lives of 167 people on board, making it the deadliest refinery event in history. All told, after damages and workers' compensation was given for what happened, the bill ended up being a staggering $3.4 billion, which back in 1988 was a staggering amount of money. Number 3. France's fat trains. I know you're thinking, how can a train be fat? Simple, when the train isn't getting enough diet and exercise. Okay, I kid. But in truth, in 2014, the French company SNCF made a large line of trains that were high speed and supposed to be upgrades for the nation. They spent $14 billion on the trains and started to put them into circulation. The problem? Trains were so bulky that they couldn't actually fit into the train stations that were supposed to be picking up people in. Which means they honestly didn't measure the stations before making the trains and thus had a problem. The solution cost them $55 million as they had to go around to each train station and expand it in order to make the trains fit. This is why they tell you to measure twice, cut once. Way to go, France! Number 2. Walkie Talkie building. I want you to look at this building. What do you think is wrong with it? I'll give you a hint. It's not a problem with the foundation, and it's not about to collapse. Everything about this building is sound except for one thing. That thing is the curved nature of one side of the building, a side that had mirrored glass. Why was that a problem? Because where it was located in London meant that the sun would be beating down on the mirrored and curved glass, which would then reflect and focus the sunlight onto the ground below it, causing things to melt, burn, scorch, and just be an unpleasant section of London to walk through. It got so bad that things were being set on fire, and the citizens called the place the Walkie Scorchy. The solution to this was not simple, nor cheap. The building itself was already $220 million in cost, but they then had to put a shade across some of the windows to dissipate the light and thus allow people to go throughout the street things were burning on safely. That fix cost many millions of dollars. Number 1. Mars Climate Orbiter. The Mars Climate Orbiter had a very simple purpose when it was launched by NASA. It was to monitor the planet, take readings of it, its climate, atmosphere, and more, and then eventually land on the planet to serve as a waypoint of communication for future missions. But when it tried to enter the atmosphere, there was a problem. Instead of landing, it burned up on entry and the $120 million probe was lost. How could that have happened? Simple. Wrong measurements. 2 teams were doing the calculations for entry to the planet, and when they did, the 2 teams used 2 different units of measurements. Because of that, the probe went in too hot and was lost. $120 million quite literally burst into flames. And there you have it, a look at some of the biggest mistakes in all of history. Which of these events do you personally think was the most costly? Can you believe the scale of some of these mistakes? Do you know another catastrophic mistake that people have made that cost lots of money? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe and I'll see you next time on the channel.